The neon lights of the Velvet Lounge flickered against the dark city skyline as I applied another layer of mascara in the dressing room mirror. My reflection stared back at me, eyes hollow despite the heavy makeup, cheekbones sharp from weight I couldn't afford to lose, and a practiced smile that never quite reached my eyes. This had been my life for 7 years now. 7 years of singing sultry jazz covers and pop hits to rooms full of men who cared more about what I looked like than the notes coming from my throat. 10 minutes, Gemma. Marcel, the floor manager, pounded on the door. Full house tonight. Make it count. I took a deep breath and smoothed down the sequined dress that felt more like armor than clothing. At 32, I was already considered aging out in this industry. The younger girls, some barely legal, were getting more attention, more private dances, more special requests from wealthy clients. The cancer diagnosis 3 weeks ago shouldn't have been a surprise. My lifestyle wasn't exactly the picture of health. Late nights, alcohol, stress, and all the other vices that came with working at a nightclub like the Velvet Lounge. The doctors used clinical terms like advanced cervical carcinoma and urgent hysterectomy. But all I heard was death knocking. Coming. I called back to Marcel, swallowing another painkiller dry. They weren't really touching the pain anymore, but they at least took the edge off enough for me to get through my sets. The crowd that night was the usual mix: businessmen loosening their ties after work, tourists looking for the authentic city experience, and regulars who knew me by name but nothing about me. My opening number was Fever, a crowd favorite that let me move slowly across the stage, trailing fingers across shoulders and collecting tips. Between sets, I caught sight of myself in the bar mirror, pale despite the stage makeup, a thin sheen of sweat on my forehead that wasn't from the hot lights. Tomorrow was the surgery. The doctors had given me a 50-50 chance. The cancer had spread further than they initially thought. "You okay?" asked Liza, one of the bartenders who'd started around the same time I did. She was one of the few people who knew about my diagnosis. "Just thinking about tomorrow," I said, forcing a smile. "You're going to be fine," she replied, sliding a glass of water towards me instead of my usual vodka soda. My cousin had the same thing. 5 years cancer-free now. I nodded, not bothering to mention that her cousin probably wasn't living on painkillers and working in a place where health insurance was a distant dream rather than a reality. My last set ended at 2 a.m. I changed into jeans and a loose sweater, wiped off most of my makeup, and slipped out the back door. The cool night air hit my face, a momentary relief from the stuffiness inside. "Need a ride?" The voice came from the shadows. Julian, one of my regulars, mid-40s, wedding ring tan line, he thought no one noticed. Nice suits, and nicer car. "I'm good, thanks," I said, pulling my jacket tighter. Early morning tomorrow, he stepped closer, the smell of expensive cologne and whiskey surrounding him. "I heard about your situation. I could help with the medical bills." I tensed. News traveled fast in places like this. I appreciate it, but I've got it covered. A lie, but a necessary one. I learned early that accepting help often came with strings I couldn't afford to have attached. Julian's hand reached out, touching my arm. "Gemma, be reasonable. A few hours of your time, that's all." "I've always treated you well, haven't I?" I pulled away. "Good night, Julian." Walking to the bus stop, I felt the familiar heaviness settling over me. This life, it wasn't what I dreamed of when I left home at 18 with a guitar and ambitions of making it big in the music industry. Back then, I sang in coffee shops and wrote songs about love and hope. Now I perform for men who saw me as a commodity, and on the side, sometimes I became exactly that. The bus was nearly empty this late. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city. Tomorrow's surgery loomed in my mind. The general anesthesia, the scalpels, the removal of the parts of me that might have one day created life. I'd never particularly wanted children, but the finality of it all still felt like a door slamming shut. My apartment was small but clean, 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with temperamental plumbing. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through them. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and laid out clothes for the morning. The hospital had given me strict instructions. Nothing to eat or drink after midnight. No makeup, no jewelry, no nail polish. I sat on the edge of my bed and did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. It wasn't an eloquent prayer, just a desperate whisper into the darkness. God, if you're there, I could use some help tomorrow. Sleep came in fits and starts, dreams of bright lights and shadowy figures chasing me down endless corridors. When my alarm finally blared, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling. The hospital was a 40-minute bus ride away. I sat with my small overnight bag on my lap, watching the city wake up. People hurried to work, coffee cups in hand, unaware that the woman sitting near them was possibly heading to her death. The thought was both terrifying and oddly freeing. The check-in process was a blur of paperwork, questions about allergies, and confirmation of my non-existent emergency contacts. A nurse with kind eyes helped me change into a hospital gown and place my few belongings in a locker. The anesthesiologist will be in shortly, she said, patting my hand. Try to relax. Relax. As if anyone could relax while waiting for strangers to cut into them. The anesthesiologist was a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and wire-rimmed glasses. He explained the procedure in a monotone voice, how the drugs would work, what I might feel, the risks involved. Any questions? He asked, preparing the IV. I shook my head, suddenly unable to speak. The fear I'd been holding at bay crashed over me in waves. You're going to be fine, he said, noticing my expression. It was the same thing Liza had said, the same empty reassurance. The drugs began to flow into my veins. The room started to blur at the edges, sounds becoming distant and muffled. I felt myself drifting, caught between consciousness and something else. As darkness closed in, my last coherent thought was a fragment of a prayer from my childhood. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And then, nothing. I first became aware of a strange weightlessness, as if gravity had suddenly lost its hold on me. The operating room came into focus, but from an entirely different perspective. I was looking down at myself. My body lay still on the table, surrounded by medical staff in surgical masks and gowns. A doctor was bent over my open abdomen, hands moving with practiced precision. Another was monitoring machines that beeped steadily beside the table. This can't be happening, I thought. This isn't real. But it felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. My senses were heightened, colors more vibrant, sounds clearer despite their muffled quality. I could see details I shouldn't have been able to notice. The small coffee stain on one nurse's shoes. The wedding band that was slightly too tight on the surgeon's finger, the clock on the wall reading 2:17 p.m. I tried to call out, to move toward my body, but I had no physical form to control. I was consciousness without substance, awareness without mass. Then I heard it. The steady beeping of the heart monitor suddenly changed its rhythm, becoming erratic. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from routine to urgent. BP's dropping, someone called out. Heart rate irregular. She's crashing, the surgeon said, his voice calm but tense. Get the crash cart. I watched as they pressed paddles to my chest, as my body arched with the shock of electricity. It was surreal, like watching a movie of someone else's life, except it was mine. My body on that table, my heart failing, my life hanging in the balance. Again, the surgeon ordered. Another shock, another violent arch of my body, no response. I felt a pull then, gentle at first, but growing stronger, drawing me away from the operating room, away from my body, toward something else. I didn't resist. There was a sense of rightness to it, as if this was what was supposed to happen next. The hospital room began to fade, replaced by what I can only describe as a tunnel. Not a physical tunnel made of concrete or earth, but one composed of light, swirling, pulsating light in shades I'd never seen before. It surrounded me, beckoned me forward. I moved through it, though moved isn't quite the right word when you have no body. I simply willed myself forward, and forward I went. The sensation was exhilarating, like flying but without the fear of falling. I felt free in a way I never had in life, unburdened by pain or worry or the constant struggle to survive. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I felt peace. As I traveled through this tunnel of light, I became aware of a presence beside me, not physical, not visible in any conventional sense, but undeniably there. It radiated warmth and compassion and something else, a sense of profound knowing. You're not alone, it seemed to say, though no words were spoken. You were never alone. The tunnel began to widen, opening into a vast space that defied description. It wasn't a place in any sense that I understood places to be. It had no walls, no ceiling, no floor, just infinite expansion in all directions, filled with that same radiant light. And music. There was music unlike anything I'd ever heard. As a singer, I thought I understood music, but this was beyond comprehension. It wasn't created by instruments or voices. It simply existed, as fundamental to this place as light or air. The harmonies were complex, yet perfect, constantly shifting, yet always in balance. It resonated not in my ears, I had none, but within whatever essence of me remained. I became aware of other presences around me, similar to the one that had accompanied me through the tunnel. They weren't human in form, yet they were familiar somehow, as if I'd always known them. Then, abruptly, the serenity shattered. The light dimmed, the music distorted into discordant noise, and the sense of peace was replaced by creeping dread. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The presences that had felt so welcoming now withdrew, as if retreating from some approaching danger. And in their place came something else, darker, heavier, malevolent. I felt myself being pulled downward, away from the light, away from the harmony and peace. The sensation was no longer of flying, but of falling, plummeting through darkness that grew colder and more oppressive with each moment. Fear gripped me, not the mundane fear I'd known in life, but something primal and overwhelming. This wasn't right. This wasn't where I was supposed to go. Help me, I tried to call out, but had no voice, no way to make myself heard. The darkness swallowed me completely. The last traces of light vanished, and with them, hope. The darkness was absolute. A void so complete it seemed to have substance. I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel, except for the sensation of falling, endlessly falling through nothingness. Then slowly, other sensations began to emerge. First came the smell, acrid and sulfurous, like burning hair and rotting meat combined. It would have made me gag if I'd had a physical form. Next came sound, distant at first, a low murmuring that gradually grew louder, resolving into what I recognized as voices, though they spoke no language I understood. As suddenly as the falling had begun, it stopped. I found myself, or whatever remained of me, in a space I could now perceive, though not through physical eyes. It was vast and cavernous, with walls that seemed to be made of some dark, slick stone. The air, if it could be called air, was heavy and oppressive, charged with a kind of malevolent energy that made my consciousness recoil. I wasn't alone. Shapes moved in the darkness, fluid, shifting forms that never quite resolved into anything I could name. They slithered and crawled and flew around me, through me, each contact feeling like ice against my very essence. These weren't human souls or angelic presences. These were something else entirely. "Welcome," a voice said. Though it wasn't a voice in any conventional sense, it was more like a thought projected directly into whatever remained of my mind. "We've been expecting you, Gemma." It knew my name. That simple fact terrified me more than anything else. "Who are you?" I tried to ask, finding that here, in this place, I could communicate through thought alone. "Where am I?" Laughter surrounded me then, cruel, mocking laughter that came from everywhere and nowhere. "You know where you are," the voice replied. "You've earned your place here. Images flashed before me, moments from my life, but not the happy ones, not the times of innocence or love or hope. Instead, I saw every transgression, every sin, every moment of weakness or cruelty or selfishness. I saw myself taking money from men for acts that made me hate myself afterward. I saw myself lying, stealing, using people for my own gain. I saw the drugs, the alcohol, the nights I couldn't remember, and the mornings I wished I could forget. "This is who you are," the voice hissed. "This is what you've made of your soul." "No," I protested. "There was more to me than that. There was goodness too." "Was there?" Another laugh, more bitter than the first. "Show me this goodness." I tried to recall acts of kindness, moments of grace, but they seemed faint and distant, overshadowed by the parade of sins being forced upon my awareness. "You turned away from the light long ago," the voice continued. "You chose this path with every decision, every indulgence, every time you hardened your heart against what you knew was right." The shapes in the darkness moved closer, becoming more defined. They were hideous beyond description, twisted parodies of living things, with features that shifted and changed even as I perceived them. Eyes appeared and disappeared, mouths opened to reveal impossible geometries of teeth. Limbs stretched and contracted in ways that defied physical laws. I realized with mounting horror that these were demons, not metaphorical ones, but actual spiritual entities of pure malevolence. And they were gathering around me, circling closer, their attention focused solely on my vulnerable essence. "She's ours now," one said, its voice like gravel being ground. "She belongs here." "Yes," another agreed, reaching out with what might have been a hand or a claw. "Let us show her what eternity holds." I tried to retreat, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness extended in all directions, and these entities seemed to exist in it as fish do in water. It was their natural environment, and I was hopelessly out of mine. The first touch was like fire, searing pain that would have made me scream if I'd had a physical body. Instead, the agony simply existed, consuming my awareness. Then came another touch, and another, each bringing fresh waves of torment. They were tearing at me, not flesh, which I no longer had, but whatever spiritual substance composed my being in this place. And with each tear came not just physical pain, but emotional and mental anguish as well. Memories of every moment of shame, every regret, every fear were amplified and forced upon me, impossible to escape or deny. "This is just the beginning," the first voice said, almost conversationally. "You have eternity to experience what you've earned." Eternity. The word echoed through my consciousness, bringing with it a despair so profound it transcended fear. Not minutes of this, not hours or days or years, but forever, never ending, never escaping. I tried to retreat within myself, to find some core that these entities couldn't reach, but there was no hiding here. I was exposed, vulnerable, completely at their mercy, and they had none. As the torment continued, I became aware of others like me, human souls trapped in this place, experiencing their own versions of the same horror. I could sense their agony, their regret, their desperate longing for relief that never came. Some had been here for what seemed like eons, their identities almost completely eroded by suffering, yet still conscious enough to experience each fresh torment. "Do you see now?" the voice asked. "Do you understand what awaits you?" I did, and in that understanding came a clarity I'd never experienced in life. All the excuses I'd made for myself, all the ways I'd justified my choices, they melted away, leaving only the stark reality of what I'd become. The life I'd lived had led me here, step by step, choice by choice. "It's too late for regret," the voice said, seeming to read my thoughts. "Too late for redemption, too late for salvation." But even as it spoke, something stirred within me, a memory, distant but persistent, of the prayer I'd whispered the night before surgery. It hadn't been much of a prayer, just a desperate plea thrown into the darkness. But it had been sincere. God, I called out now, not knowing if he could hear me in this place, not knowing if he would listen even if he could. If you're there, please help me. I don't deserve it, but please, help me. The demons recoiled as if struck, their torments momentarily suspended. He can't hear you here, one hissed, but there was uncertainty in its voice now. This is our domain. God, I called again, focusing all my remaining strength into the plea. I'm sorry for everything. I see it now, I understand. Please forgive me, something changed in the darkness. A tremor ran through it, like ripples in a pond. The demons sensed it too, becoming agitated, their forms shifting more rapidly. She belongs to us, one shrieked. She chose us. God, I cried out a third time, the name itself feeling like light in the darkness. Jesus, save me. And then it happened. A pinprick of light appeared in the distance, tiny at first, barely perceptible, but growing brighter with each moment. The demons scattered before it like cockroaches, exposed to sudden brightness, their shrieks of rage turning to wails of frustration. The light expanded, cutting through the darkness like a blade, creating a path toward me. Within it, I sensed a presence, not like the demons, but powerful beyond measure, radiating warmth and love and forgiveness. Child, a voice said, and unlike the demonic whispers, this voice was both within and around me, gentle yet carrying absolute authority. You called for me. Yes, I answered, unable to find other words. Do you wish to leave this place? More than anything. Then come to me. The demons, recovering from their initial retreat, surged forward again, trying to block my path to the light, trying to reclaim me. She chose us, they insisted. Her life is testament to that choice. She has called on me, the voice from the light replied. And though it remained gentle, there was steel beneath the softness. And I have heard her. The light extended further, forming a corridor through the darkness, reaching toward me. The demons could not enter it, could not cross its boundaries, though they raged at its edges, their forms distorting in fury. Come, the voice invited again. Choose again. I moved toward the light, expecting the demons to try to hold me back, to drag me deeper into the darkness. But though they screamed and threatened, they could not prevent my progress once I had decided to make it. Each step, though I had no physical feet to step with, took me further from the horrors and closer to the warmth of the light. The demons' voices grew fainter, their threats less potent, their power over me diminishing with each choice to continue forward. As I approached the source of the light, I began to make out a figure within it, not clearly defined, but recognizable nonetheless. A man, yet more than a man, with arms outstretched in welcome. Jesus, I asked, hardly daring to believe. I am, the figure confirmed. And in those two simple words was a universe of meaning. I moved closer still, drawn by a love so profound it made my earthly understanding of the concept seem like a shadow of the reality. This was love in its purest form, unconditional, unearned, unlimited. But my sins, I began, the things I've done. Forgiven, Jesus said, if you choose to accept that forgiveness. I do, I said, without hesitation, I do. As I reached him, as his light enveloped me completely, I felt a transformation begin. The weight of my sins, the stain of my choices, they didn't vanish, but they were covered, washed clean by something greater than themselves. I was being remade, restored, renewed. The darkness was gone now, replaced entirely by light. The demons' voices had faded to nothing, unable to penetrate this sanctuary. And in their place was music again, that same perfect harmony I'd heard earlier, but now I understood its source. It was the music of creation itself, of love expressing itself across dimensions, of grace flowing from its infinite fountain. What happens now, I asked. Now, Jesus replied, you see the truth, all of it. The light surrounding me shifted, becoming, if possible, even more radiant. I felt myself being elevated, rising upward through layers of existence I hadn't known were there. With each passing moment, my awareness expanded, comprehending things that would have been impossible for my earthly mind to grasp. I saw the universe, not as astronomers see it through telescopes, but in its totality, from the vastest galaxy to the smallest subatomic particle, all connected, all singing the same cosmic song in different keys. I saw time not as a linear progression from past to future, but as a dimension that could be traversed in multiple directions, where every moment existed simultaneously. I saw reality itself, not as a single fixed state, but as infinite possibilities coexisting in perfect harmony. And through it all, I saw love, the fundamental force binding everything together, more basic than gravity, more essential than light, the very fabric from which all of creation was woven. This is what is, Jesus said, his presence beside me a constant anchor in this sea of overwhelming revelation. Now see what could have been. The vision shifted again, and I was looking at myself, not my physical body, but the person I might have become if I had made different choices. I saw a Gemma who had held onto her faith, who had pursued her music for the joy of creation rather than survival, who had formed genuine connections with others instead of transactional relationships. I saw a woman who struggled, who sometimes failed, who wasn't perfect, but who lived with purpose and integrity. This was always possible, Jesus explained. Every moment offered a choice, a chance to turn toward light rather than darkness. I felt sorrow then, not the tortured agony the demons had inflicted, but a clean, honest grief for what might have been. Is it too late? I asked. Have I lost this forever? It's never too late to choose again, he replied. But first, you must truly understand the choices you've made. Another shift, and I was seeing my life again. I saw my childhood, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, who taught me to sing by joining her voice with mine on old gospel hymns. I saw the church we attended, where I'd first felt the stirring of something greater than myself. I saw my teenage rebellion, not as simple defiance, but as a complex response to pain and uncertainty. I saw my journey into adulthood, the dreams deferred, the compromises made, the gradual hardening of my heart as disappointment followed disappointment. I saw how I distanced myself from faith, step by step, not in one dramatic rejection, but in 1,000 small choices to turn away. And I saw the people whose lives had intersected with mine, not just the clients at the club or the men I'd been with, but everyone. The elderly neighbor I'd helped with groceries, the stray cat I'd fed despite barely being able to feed myself, the young girl new to the club whom I'd taken under my wing to protect from the worst aspects of the life. You were never only your sins, Jesus said gently. You were always more than the sum of your mistakes. What happens now? I asked again. Now you must choose, Jesus replied. Not under duress, not out of fear, but with full understanding of what your choice means. Choose what? Whether to remain here in this state of being or to return. Return? The concept seemed impossible. To my body, to life. Yes. Can I stay here with you instead? I asked. The thought of returning to pain and struggle suddenly unappealing compared to this place of perfect peace. You could, Jesus acknowledged. Many do. But there is purpose yet for you, if you choose to embrace it. What purpose? To live the life you now see is possible. To use what you've learned here to help others avoid the darkness you've escaped. To be a light in places that have none. I considered this. The thought of returning to my broken body, to the struggles of earthly existence, was daunting. But the thought of using my second chance to make a difference, that stirred something within me. It won't be easy, Jesus warned. The path of light rarely is. You'll face temptation, doubt, pain. You'll sometimes fail, but you won't be alone. Another shift in the vision, and I saw what my return might look like. The recovery from surgery, the battle against cancer, the rebuilding of a life based on different foundations. I saw obstacles, setbacks, struggles, but also joy, purpose, connection. I saw a future that would require courage, but promised fulfillment beyond anything my former life had offered. "The choice is yours," Jesus said. I thought of the darkness I'd escaped, of the light I'd found. I thought of others still trapped in their own versions of my former life, unaware of what awaited them if they continued on their paths. I thought of the difference one voice, my voice, might make if I shared what I now knew to be true. I want to go back, I decided. I want to try again. Jesus smiled, a smile that contained universes of love and approval. "Then go with my blessing. Remember that you are loved beyond measure, beyond comprehension, beyond time itself. And remember that every moment offers a new choice." I felt myself beginning to descend, moving back through the layers of existence toward the physical realm. The expansive awareness I'd experienced began to contract, focusing once more on a single point of consciousness. As I continued my descent, I felt his final blessing wash over me. Not a goodbye, but a promise of continued presence, of guidance that would never leave me regardless of whether I could always perceive it. The light began to fade, replaced by darkness again, but not the oppressive void of before. This was the simple absence of physical sight, the darkness behind closed eyelids. I felt myself returning to the constraints of flesh, to the limitations of human perception. And with that return came pain, the immediate physical discomfort of a body that had undergone trauma, but also a deeper ache of loss for the expanded awareness I'd briefly experienced. Yet alongside the pain was something else, purpose, clarity, and a certainty that what I'd experienced was real, more real than anything I'd known before. The first physical sensation I became aware of was a crushing pressure in my chest, followed by the sharp intake of breath that felt like fire in my lungs. Sound returned next, the urgent beeping of machines, voices speaking rapidly in medical terminology, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. "She's back," someone exclaimed, the voice muffled as if coming through water. "We've got a pulse, 16 minutes and 20 seconds. Later, I would learn that was how long my heart had stopped, how long I had been clinically dead on that operating table. It had felt like an eternity, and in some ways, perhaps it had been. I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. They were taped shut for the surgery, I realized dimly. I tried to speak, to move, to give some sign that I was present, that I had returned, but my body refused to cooperate. The anesthesia still held me in its grip, allowing consciousness but not control. "Let's finish up here," the surgeon said. "She's stable for now. We'll monitor for neurological function when she wakes up." The operation continued. I felt pressure but no pain as they completed the hysterectomy, removing the cancer that had threatened my life in a more conventional way than what I'd just experienced. Throughout it all, I remained in a strange liminal state, aware but unable to communicate, present but passive. Finally, I managed to open my eyes. The room was dim, curtains drawn against what appeared to be late afternoon sun trying to peek through. The next few days passed in a blur of medical checks, pain management, and fitful sleep. The doctors were amazed at my recovery, not just that I had survived the cardiac arrest during surgery, but that my body seemed to be healing at an accelerated rate. The cancer, which had spread further than they initially thought, showed signs of retreating in follow-up scans. Medical miracle was whispered in hallways, but I knew it wasn't science that had saved me. When I finally told Lisa about my experience, sitting in my hospital room with sunlight streaming through the window, she cried and held my hand. "I always knew there was something more to you, Gemma," she said. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of shame lifting from my shoulders, replaced by something lighter, hope. 6 months later, I stood on a different stage, a small platform in the corner of a community center, where I now taught music to at-risk youth. My guitar felt right in my hands, not like a prop, but like an extension of myself. As I sang the closing notes of an original song about redemption, the small audience, mostly teenagers with stories not so different from my own, applauded. Among them sat Julian, who had found his own path to recovery after I shared my story with him. He had become one of our biggest donors, funding scholarships for kids who wanted to pursue music seriously. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who once offered to pay for my body now paid to nurture souls. Sometimes at night, I still felt echoes of both the darkness and the light I had experienced. The memory of demonic torment would wake me in a cold sweat, but it always faded when I remembered the presence that had rescued me. I kept my promise to be a light in dark places, speaking openly about my near-death experience to anyone who would listen. Not everyone believed me, of course, but that didn't matter. I knew what I had seen, what I had felt, what I had been saved from and for. My voice, once used to seduce and entertain, now carried a different message. That no matter how far you've fallen, redemption is possible. That even in the deepest darkness, light can still break through. That it's never too late to choose again.